I'd like to thank the New Media Advocacy Project, Rebecca Rich-McCohen, and the Constitution Project for allowing us to share excerpts from their new film, Defending Gideon, at today's program. Narrated by Martin Sheen, this documentary pays tribute to the lasting legacy of the case that we are gathered here today to reflect upon, and it will premiere in its entirety on Monday. Now, at this time, it's my honor to continue our program by bringing two extraordinary public servants into the conversation. Please join me in welcoming former Vice President Walter Mondale, whose work as Minnesota Attorney General was really instrumental in building support for Clarence Earl Gideon, and Associate Justice Elena Kagan, who as a former United States Solicitor General is in a unique position to have an intimate understanding of the Supreme Court from both sides of the bench. Justice Kagan, recently at a conversation on Gideon was organized by the American Bar Association. The question was posed as to whether Gideon guaranteed a Cadillac defense or a Chevy Nova defense. What do you think Gideon actually promised?
So I'm going to answer that question, Eric, but before I do, I want to thank you. And I also want to thank Vice President Mondale. It's a terrific thing that you're having this event. But more than that, it's a terrific thing that you've made this one of your signature issues. I mean, you're a prosecutor, and you head up a department of prosecutors, and I hope we can talk about the role of prosecutors in this effort. But you are a role model in this respect, being so as public as you have been on the importance of this issue for the entire criminal justice system, and I want to thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
And then, of course, the Vice President was in some respects, the role model for that, right? The prosecutor who said, you know, we all have an interest in seeing that the criminal justice system is run fairly. And what an incredible thing that you did by taking that, we see all the time these briefs that come from 20 states or 30 states or 40 states, always on the prosecution side, and you sort of turning that around and assisting Mr. Gideon. What an extraordinary thing. So thank you for
So, Cadillac or Chevy Nova?
You know, I'm not really a car person.
All right, well, let's say a Chevy Nova.
How bad is a Chevy Nova?
That's well, I don't want to,
Exactly.
It's a wonderful car, it's just not as great as a Cadillac.
Nobody's entitled to a Cadillac defense. Nobody's entitled to the best defense that money can buy. Some people are going to get that defense if they have their own money, but we don't have the resources to make that happen, and I'm not sure if we did have the resources that is exactly what we should want. But everybody is entitled to a good lawyer, a lawyer who can advise you about what you're facing and about your choices, a lawyer who, when she goes into court, knows what's going on there and can lead a good trial effort, a lawyer who can, also, has the skills, the competence, and the resources to investigate your case, to put on a good effort, to advise you properly with respect to plea bargaining. These are critical things for the criminal justice system. And so, I don't know, is that a Chevy Nova or a Ford Taurus? Let's go with a Ford Taurus. How about that?
All right.
Everybody's entitled to a Taurus defense.
All right. If that's not quite Cadillac, it's getting certainly above Nova. I'm not sure where Tauruses fit in, but we have the idea. Vice President Mondale, or I don't know, I understand you prefer to be called Mr. Mondale? Or Fritz, or how should I refer to you?
Your Holiness.
Your Holiness, okay. Okay, in light of the new Pope, that's pretty cheeky. We saw in the film clip just a few moments ago that you encouraged other state attorneys general to sign an amicus brief on behalf of Gideon. And when you responded to the Attorney General of Florida, you wrote, and I want to quote this, I believe, this is your words now, I believe in federalism and states' rights too, but I also believe in the Bill of Rights. No one knows better than an attorney general or a prosecuting attorney that in this day and age, furnishing an attorney to those felony defendants who can't afford to hire one is fair and feasible. Now, what had you seen and what had you experienced that made you feel that way?
Before I answer, I want to recognize somebody who's not here. Gideon's true trumpet, Tony Lewis.
Yes.
I'm sorry he can't be here. We saw him on the screen, but one of the reasons we're here today is Tony Lewis picked up that cause, wrote that magnificent book, and helped carry the story to us today. And I hope Tony knows we're all, we miss him and we love the role that he's played here. Justice Kagan, thank you for your kindness. I was a young attorney general. My law professor, Yale Camazar, called me, told me about the letter that was going to come from the Florida Attorney General, and said that he hoped that I would help organize an amicus brief on Gideon's side. And I said, if you'll help me, I will do it. He worked with Harvard and Eddie McCormick, then the Attorney General of Massachusetts, and we really went to work within the association, and I think it was somewhat unprecedented to have 22 states. I didn't realize that somebody told me today Georgia joined in. I got to tell Carter that's a good state. But I think it made the argument. I think it helped the case's outcome.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Looking back 50 years from that time, do you think Gideon has done what you expected that it would do?
I think I was a little naive. I thought once the Supreme Court ruled that way, that things automatically happen. It's been a long haul. I think it's unquestionably a strong, powerful decision that's been very important to the cause of justice in America, and I don't want to be misunderstood. But it's been a troubled history. The many states have not had the money. Some of this has devolved down to the local level, and some of the local officials are not that committed to it. Governments are short of funds. We've had too many examples of incompetent counsel, of inadequate counsel for the necessary services a defendant needs. We've had outrageous things that have happened where it hasn't really been justice. The defendant hasn't really been defended under the terms of the decision. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, and that's why I think this conference is important. We get back to work. If I can just say one final thing on this issue, I don't know of any national issues where the problem, to which shortage of defense counsel, is quite matched with as many unemployed and underemployed lawyers as there are in America today. We should be bright enough to be able to match this need with the tremendous oversupply of lawyers that we have to help out. I think we've got to think of some way of doing it.
All right. Justice Kagan, what do you see in the courts today that make you think that there's more left to do to achieve the promise of Gideon?
Well, you see too many instances of ineffective assistance of counsel, you know. I mean, some instances where you just think, was this lawyer, crazy? We had a case a couple of years ago, a very important case, where we enhanced the right to counsel within the context of plea bargaining, and it arose because a defendant was given a very good, very fair plea offer by a prosecutor after shooting a woman. And his lawyer told him, well, you can't be convicted of this. Why can't you be convicted of this charge? Because you shot her below the waist. And, you know, it was craziness. It had no support in the law at all, and yet this person went to trial, was convicted, got a sentence 4 times as long as the prosecutor offered in the plea negotiations. So sometimes you see things like that. But in some ways, what's more worrying is that you see just a sort of systemic failure. You know, people who don't have the resources, who don't have the time, who have such a huge caseload. They've had no opportunity, no time, even though they want to. These are well-intentioned people and competent lawyers, but somehow have gotten sort of put into a system where they do no investigation, where they haven't prepared properly, and where, as a result, the defendant has gotten, a less than adequate effort. And we see too much of it. It's very sad.
Mr. Vice President, the decision left really kind of unanswered the question of how lawyers should be provided, how they should be paid. You suggested that we have, a surplus of lawyers that we might try to tap into. But what do you think the implications are, positive or negative, about this lack of guidance from the court in the Gideon decision as to the hows?
I think that the court has issued some recent opinions to which Justice Kagan referred that has touched around the edges of it. But I believe that the fundamental principle of the Gideon case, that the defendant should be competently represented by counsel, not equal, I would say, or somewhat equal to what persons of means might have to provide if they were in that position. I think in so many cases that is tragically missing. And I think we should be able to figure out, and if I could add one other thing that really bothers me, I think there's a lot of evidence that these determinate sentences, the compulsory sentence guidelines, have armed prosecutors who are so inclined to use threats of severe consequences of tough charges to scare criminal defendants into settling for a substantial jail sentence, but not as substantial as the prosecutor has in mind. And I think all over the country, that is undermining the concept of justice. The idea that even if the person is found guilty, maybe a lot of them should be found guilty, there should be somewhere in his being the idea that, well, at least I was dealt with fairly. If that's missing, then I think we've got real problems in America. And I think many of these proceedings, 90% of them never get to a trial. I think a lot of this, some said the trial penalty is out there. People are afraid to take a chance that they would end up with this harsher charge. I think that's a real pervasive problem in the American justice system.
Justice Kagan, you've had a number of roles that you've played in our justice system. You were the dean of a law school that I didn't go to. A great law school.
But which the vice president has already mentioned today.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That would be that school in Boston. What about law students? How do we get them interested in indigent defense, and what role can law students play in dealing with these kinds of issues?
Well, one thing I did was that every year when our first years came into the school, we had an event where we talked to them about the value of doing various kinds of public interest work and also the joys of doing various kinds of public interest work. And I knew that I should invite Brian Stevenson to my event every year. And if they weren't ready to do it then, there was no hope at all. So I would say you could have all the law schools just get Brian Stevenson on their program.
I'm going to talk to Brian a little later on.
No, this is, exactly. This is, I think law schools can do a lot in terms of really instilling in their students the importance of serving the underserved, both in the criminal system and in the civil system, and the value of doing that, and as I said, the joy of doing that. Some of it is financial. Schools have to put their money where their mouth is and make it possible for students to pay off these enormous debts that they incur in law school. So, not every school can do what Harvard did or Columbia did, but to put more money than they are doing into loan forgiveness and other ways to support people who want to do this kind of work, and to have good career counseling so that people know where these jobs are. Often, to get a job in a public defender's office is actually harder for a law student than to get a job in a law firm. And and to have the ability to direct law students to where the jobs are, and to really just instill in them, I think, the value of pro bono service. So, not all your law students are going to become public defenders for their careers, but to have a sense of, wherever you end up, if you're in a law firm for the rest of your life, still part of your time, part of your energies should go to serving the underserved, and especially in the criminal system. It's a great way for young lawyers in law firms to actually get some trial experience. So law firms, too, I think, can encourage this.
Good. Now, Mr. Vice President, Your Holiness, we have talked a lot about Gideon, a criminal case, and much of the focus of the conversation is on the criminal system. What do you think about the civil side, where really life-altering decisions can frequently be made? Landlord-tenant things, civil suits, custody determinations. Do you think that we should have an analog, perhaps a civil Gideon in addition to the criminal one?
Yes, I do, and I've spoken out for it several times. The fact of it is that in many ways the criminal-civil distinction doesn't mean much to the person on the other end of the line. You can lose your house, you can lose your family, you can be put in a mental institution, you can lose your job, you can be thrown out of the country. All sorts of things can happen that have life and death consequences to you in the name of civil law. So I think we need, I fought for years for the Legal Services Program. It's a good program, but it's full of limitations, doesn't have enough money. We have legal aid societies in every state that we should be supporting more fully, and we should have some sort of legislation. A few states now, I think California has something. We should start moving in that direction. Most European countries have it now, to try to provide that kind of assistance.
Justice Kagan, do you think that we see different levels of access, different levels of representation when you look at the federal system as opposed to the state system? Does one worry you more than the other?
I think that the state systems are more worrying. There's obviously a real diversity, so some state systems have really figured out how to provide representation to criminal defendants well, but some, much less so. So I think the project and the real efforts need to be put into the state system.
I've seen the red card here, so that means I think we're supposed to end up. But let me ask you both, 50 years from Gideon, what's your basic feeling? Are you optimistic about where we are, or optimistic about where we're going? Do you think that we're on the right track, or do you think there are fundamental things that we still need to do in our nation to make the promise of Gideon real?
Oh, I think that there is a lot we still need to do. And that's not to say that we haven't made enormous progress. If you look now, 50 years past, I mean, there has been enormous progress made. But from my vantage point, at least, I see just too many cases where there's been ineffective assistance of counsel. And I'll give you, if I have just my two hobby horses from my vantage point. One is we get capital cases all the time. It's the hardest part of the job, obviously. By the time they come to us, there's actually a limited amount that anybody can do. All the issues are procedurally barred. They've been waived at some point in the process. And a frustration is that, by the time they get to the end of the process, sometimes the lawyers for these capital defendants are very, very good. But they can't do very much because the lawyers these people have had at the beginning, at the trial level, have sort of given the whole game away. And especially under current legislation, there's just not much that can be done on later collateral review. So somehow, I know this is, I'm sure that there are a lot of people thinking about this, but somehow sort of trying to shift those resources so that it's less at the end and more at the beginning where it really matters would be extremely important. The second thing that I see all the time, and this isn't a Gideon issue, nobody's entitled to the absolute best advocate at the Supreme Court, But if I look at the lawyers at the Supreme Court, we have, an extraordinary group of lawyers who appear very regularly before us, who are kind of the Supreme Court bar. And it includes, by now, the state attorneys actually are exceptional. My colleagues talk about 20 years ago, the lawyers for the state were not so good. But now most states have solicitors general offices, which have really exceptional, skilled, experienced appellate counsel. States sometimes hire private attorneys. NAG, the National Association for Attorney General, provides extraordinary backup for them. The place where, I have to say, case in and case out, the category of litigant who is not getting great representation at the Supreme Court are criminal defendants. And quite frankly, a lot of these cases, they're pretty hard to win anyway. And what we see is that people are being represented by whoever the trial counsel was for a particular defendant. And appellate advocacy is hard. And it takes a lot of skill and a lot of experience. And so my big hobby horse is sort of getting people in the defense bar to be thinking about this and to be thinking about how to get folks who, might have been extremely good trial counsel and who justifiably think that they know the case inside and out, but try to get them to realize that actually at the Supreme Court level, where, we're making some important decisions about criminal defendants' rights, that those cases are given to, a ton of law firms that do this at a super high level would do it pro bono. There are law school, Supreme Court clinics now that work at a super high level. Somehow getting those cases into the hands of the absolute best Supreme Court advocates would be, I think, an enormous help for the system.
I tend to agree with you. Having been I think a pretty good trial lawyer, and also having argued some appellate matters, they are fundamentally different things, and that's why you'll only see me. This is as close as I'm going to get to you in the Supreme Court. Mr. Vice President, what about you? 50 years out, optimistic. Have we made Gideon a reality? And if not, what do you think we need to be doing?
I think it's a terrific opinion, fundamental opinion, high watermark and justice issues, but it's challenged. So I am both optimistic and concerned. I spent a lot of my life, most of my life, in elective office, and I can tell you arguing for more money to defend criminals is not the easiest way to win a close election. And it shows in the legislature, it shows in the Congress. Look at all these amendments that are adopted. There's something about providing really good counsel with public money for a poor defendant that drives some people crazy. I don't know why. Equal justice would seem to imply that, but this is a really tough and sometimes nasty part of politics. And I think that puts more burden on the court. If this is the Sixth Amendment, if this is the 14th Amendment, then we better make it mean what it says. Right now we're off the mark to some degree, and I hope that we can get, I don't want to go further on this, but more support from the court.
Justice Kagan smiled. Well, I want to thank you both for participating in today's conversation. Your insights, I think, were wonderful. I know you're both extremely busy, and we're very grateful that you decided to spend the time with us. Justice Kagan, Vice President Mondale, thank you both so much.